Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. So welcome to the fifth session of the symposium, which is on Şîrâzî's astronomy. So this will be the second panel devoted to Şîrâzî's astronomy, which is actually not surprising, given that Şîrâzî left us an enormous amount of astronomical work. So if you had a chance to follow the yesterday's panel, it was mainly about the fact that Şîrâzî was a very dynamic writer, and he had a strong intellectual and scientific integrity that he does not have any problem to open his ideas, his theories for discussion. So we will continue in that panel to discover different aspects of Şîrâzî's astronomy. But I want to say at the outset that the main theme of this panel is basically how Şîrâzî received his predecessors. So how he critically engages with theories, ideas proposed before him. And without further ado, I would like to give the word to the first speaker, Taro MIMURA from the University of Tokyo. Just a very brief introduction to Taro. He's an historian of science. He published articles, research on the history of astronomy and medicine. Among his publication, I would like to address his publication together with Cemil Recep, the publication of Ikhwan Safa's Astronomia, which is a very important text. So, so now we can give the floor to him. Yes, the floor is yours, Taro.
Thank you very much for introducing my my career. So I will start my talk and I will share the screen. So Mu'ayyad Urḍī is known to have been summoned in the 1250s by Nasruddin Tusi from Damascus to Maragha. Before coming to Maragha, he wrote in Damascus Kitab al-Hayy, where he criticized Ptolemy's works and proposed new planetary models. Since he was working at Maragha, it's reasonable to think that his reformation of Ptolemaic planetary models had some influence on the Maragha scholars. In fact, Saliba shows that Kutbuddin Şîrâzî adopted the main part of Urḍī's new planetary models in his higher works, though he didn't denote the name of Urḍī. Scholars in Maragha, except for Şîrâzî, didn't mention Urḍī's new models, so it's difficult for us to notice their scholarly interaction with Urḍī and show how they accepted or rejected Urḍī's innovation. Here we must remark that Urḍī reformed not only planetary models, but also Ptolemy's planetary order in the Kitab al-Hayy, where he recalculated the distances of the planets from the Earth and concluded that Venus should be above the Sun. As I will illustrate later, Şîrâzî concluded in his higher works that Urḍī's order was the correct one, although again, he didn't mention the name of Urḍī. Şîrâzî's acceptance of Urḍī's new planetary order reminds us of a possibility that how his new planetary order caused discussions among them might reveal his actual impact on them. In this talk, I will detect the Maragha Associates' opinions concerning the planetary order from their works and show how they responded to Urḍī's impact on the reformation of Ptolemy's astronomy. And finally, I will elucidate Şîrâzî's way of incorporating Urḍī's achievement into the higher tradition. The Ikhtilāf Majlis manuscript contains an astronomical work titled Kitab Talhis al-Majesty. Although the information of who was the author is missing in the manuscript, its author was almost undoubtedly Asir-di Abhari. Abhari was especially known as an author of philosophical works, but he wrote quite a few works in mathematics and astronomy, and his name was registered in the list of the Malaga associates. He was also known as a famous teacher of philosophy, having many disciples. One of them was Najmuddin Ali ibn Umar al-Qazwini al-Katibi, the author of Hikmatul Ayn. What's remarkable about Katibi's career is that his name was also contained in the list of the Malaga associates. We must note that the name of Katibi was mentioned in the introduction of the Talhis, whose beginning is on the screen. As for the content of the Talhis, the introduction indicates that Abhari aims to summarize the almagest for Katibi. Here I focus on a section of the planetary distance, namely Book 10, Section 1, where Abhari first explains the planetary order with recourse to occultations and paradoxes, as is on the screen. Moreover, we find another astronomical work composed by him containing a discussion of the planetary order, which is extant in Istanbul Jalala manuscripts, whose front page has a note added by the copyist as a kind of its title, a quote that is followed by what the master Asir-di Abhari summarizes concerning Ilm al-Hayy from Kushyar's Hayy and Ibn Afla's Hayy. Note that the Ikhtasara ends by the explanation about planetary order, as is on the screen. Remarkably, an astronomical section of Katibi's Hikmatul Ayn contains a discussion on planetary order. Hikmatul Ayn consists of two parts, metaphysics and natural philosophy, and at the end of part 2, section 3, Katibi mentions the planetary order, as is on the screen. This part illustrates that after he presents the standard planetary order, he adds a witness by the master on Venus transit. Of course, the person whom he calls the master is Ibn Sina, who reported Venus transit in the Shifar. Even more remarkably, Katibi ends his note about the planetary order with a comment on the existence of scholars who think the order of the planets differently. His remark shows that in his days, this new order becomes an important thesis, so he should mention it. In fact, this order is the one proposed by Urḍī. As mentioned beforehand, Urḍī declared a new planetary order in his Kitab al-Hayy, where he concluded that Venus should be above the sun. Thus, the fact that Katibi mentioned this thesis makes it clear that Urḍī's argument gave a great impact to scholars affiliated with the Malaga Observatory. On the other hand, we notice that the teacher Abhari didn't mention Urḍī's new order in the Talhis and the Ikhtasara. In the Talhis, Abhari explained the standard order by utilizing their paradoxes. But in the Ikhtasara, he didn't give an opinion about the sun's place, just noting, quote, however, the sun's place with regard to the rest of the orbs is not certain. Then we have a question. Why did his confidence in the paradoxes disappear in the Ikhtasara? One of the possible reasons is that he recognized Jabir ibn Afla's argument on the place of Venus and Mercury. Jabir ibn Afla, a scholar active in the 12th century Andalusia, was the author of the Ihtiyârât of Al-Majesty, where he pointed out several defects of the Al-Majest. His most severe attack was on the places of Venus and Mercury. In his critique, he calculated the parallaxes of Venus and Mercury and found that they have smaller parallaxes than the Sun. So he concluded that Venus and Mercury should be above the Sun. It's true that Andalusia was far from Malaga, so the access to Jarvis' work might be restricted to scholars active around Malaga, like Abu-Hari. In fact, the contents of the Tarikh indicate that when Abu-Hari composed it, the Islah was unavailable to him. The fact that, however, Kutbuddin Şîrâzî wrote a commentary on the Tarikh Islah shows that the Islah arrived among the Malaga associates, possibly at some point of Abu-Hari's lifetime. Its abrupt circulation among them after almost 100 years silence on Jarvis' achievement in this region is significant. Here we can point out Urḍī's contact with them in Malaga as an important factor agitating their interest in Jarvis' work, because Urḍī's Kitab al-Hayy explicitly mentioned Jarvis as an important predecessor, criticizing the Almagest. So he might advocate the importance of the Islah among them. This analysis shows the existence of vivid discussion concerning the place of the Sun among scholars around Malaga, which occurred abruptly in their days, probably at the time when Urḍī contacted them. Thus, their opinions concerning the planetary order in their works sometimes give criteria determining the order of the composition dates of their works. For example, we are now sure that Abu-Hari composed the Tarikh, and after he learned the arguments about the order of Venus, Mercury, the Sun from the Islah as well as Kitab al-Hayy, he wrote the Ikhtasara in which he added a comment about the uncertainty of the Sun's place. As for the case of Katibi, he certainly wrote the Hikmatul Ayn after he recognized Urḍī's new thesis at the time of Urḍī's arrival to Malaga. Moreover, since Urḍī was invited to Malaga by Tusi, we can expect that Urḍī's new planetary order also gave some impact on Tusi at some point. Thus, I will overview Tusi's opinion about the planetary order in his works. First, in the Zubdatul Idrak, Tusi explained the standard order with respect to occultations and parallaxes, just as Abu-Hari did in the Tarikh. Next, in the Risala Mu'ayyad, Tusi repeated almost the same arguments as that in the Zubda. This survey shows that Urḍī's argument, as well as Jarvis' argument, didn't influence the Zubda and the Mu'ayyad, but in Tazkira, he drastically reshaped his arguments on the planetary order. First, in Book 2, Chapter 2, he explained the standard planetary order only by using occultations without mentioning parallaxes. And in Book 4, Chapters 2 to 7, he calculated the distances and bodies of the planets afresh and proved the standard order. To see the refinement of the way of explaining the standard order was most probably made for responding to Urḍī's new calculation, together with Jarvis' criticism. Thus, it's clear that Tusi recognized Urḍī's thesis on the planetary order when he composed the Tazkira. Because the Mu'ayyad is known to have been composed in 1235, we can conclude that Tusi was acquainted with Urḍī at some point between 1235 and 1250s. As for the case of the Zubdatul Idrak, since it has no indication of the date when he composed it, we haven't been able to posit this work up until now in the timeline of his astronomical research. But the fact that Zubdatul Idrak presented the standard explanation of the planetary order indicates that he wrote the Zubda before his acquaintance with Urḍī. Therefore, we can now conclude that the composition date of the Zubda further preceded 1261, when he wrote the first version of the Tazkira. Here, we must note that, as mentioned beforehand, higher works written by Kutbuddin Şîrâzî, who was an eminent student of Tusi, accepted Urḍī's new planetary order as the correct one. Next, I will overview Şîrâzî's opinion about the planetary order and show how he included Urḍī's argument in his higher works. Beginning his career as a medical student, Şîrâzî met Tusi in 1233 and studied with him philosophy and mathematical sciences in Melerge, so that he became one of Tusi's most prominent students. After his study with Tusi, he went to Anatolia, where he composed his first higher work, Nihayat-ı. In the Nihaya, Şîrâzî told in the introduction that he wrote it in the request of his patron named Muhammad ibn Umar al-Badakhshani, who asked Şîrâzî, quote, that I follow the linguistic style of the Tazkira, which nothing before has surpassed and nothing after has overtaken, and that I incorporate it in the course of the exposition if it's clear, and expound upon it if something in it is obscure. So the Nihaya follows the structure and wording of the Tazkira. To show the similarity between the Nihaya and the Tazkira, I present the table of contents of the Nihaya Book 4, which contain discussion about the planetary order, together with the table of contents of the Tazkira Book 4, as is on the screen. This table shows that Şîrâzî adopted the Tazkira structure in the Nihaya, even copying almost all chapter headings. Moreover, we notice that Şîrâzî extensively copied the text of the Tazkira in the body of his text. For example, the beginning of the Nihaya Book 4, Chapter 4, and the beginning of the Tazkira Book 4, Chapter 3 are on the screen. From the Nihaya's text quoted here, however, we notice that while Şîrâzî copied the Tazkira's text faithfully, he added in the last part an explanation, quote, because it is difference between a quarter of it and half of it. This shows that when he considered his text of the Tazkira needs more explanation, he expanded it by adding his own words. Remarkably, we find in the Nihaya Book 4 that when Şîrâzî expanded to his explanation, he sometimes copied and pasted the text from Tusi's Tahrir al-Majesty without notifying that he quoted it, as Sajjad mentioned yesterday. For example, in the Tazkira Book 4, Chapter 3, where Tusi explained the distances between the centers of the sun, the earth, and the moon by using two shadow cones cast by the sun, he presented a figure called pine tree figure without elucidating geometrical settings. In the Nihaya Book 4, Chapter 4, on the other hand, after citing the Tazkira text, Şîrâzî quoted Tusi's geometrical explanation without the name of his source about the pine tree figure in the Tahrir al-Majesty, where Tusi offered an extra lemma. The images on the screen show the correspondence between the Nihaya and the Tahrir al-Majesty. This analysis illustrates Şîrâzî's editorial strategy in composing the Nihaya. He first structured the Nihaya mainly by quoting the text of the Tazkira, and then, when necessary, he expanded to his explanation not only by inserting his own words, but also by citing other works, such as Tusi's Tahrir Majesty. Here, we must note that, as Saliba shows, in the latter half of the Nihaya Book 4, Chapter 2, he extensively quoted Urḍī's explanation about how to determine the height of the atmosphere from the Kitab al-Hayyah, again without remarking his source. Since this topic was not discussed in Tazkira, this example confirms that through his editorial work of the Nihaya, he aims to update the Tazkira's contents to make them more comprehensive and accessible to students by supplying quite a few extra explanations. What's remarkable about Shirazi's supplements to the Tazkira is that he also added information that seems not to contain a new aspect complementing the contents of the Tazkira. For example, in almost all chapters of the Nihaya, Book 4, after quoting Tusi's text, Shirazi added the crucial Ibn Laban's explanation taken from his Gij. Kushar's Gij contains a section on the distances and bodies of the planets, which also circulates as a separate work in several manuscripts. In the Nihaya, Shirazi quoted Kushar's text several times after the text of the Tazkira, sometimes with Shirazi's criticism of its contents. Note that he put the name Kushar at the first time when he cited it. His criticism confirms that he considered Tusi's explanation to be better than Kushar's. Even more remarkable is that Shirazi went beyond Tusi in the Nihaya Book 4, Chapter 9, where he criticized all existing opinions about the distances and bodies of the planets. So he concluded that Venus should be above the sun. Here we must remark that by comparing the text of the Nihaya and the text of the Urḍī's Kitab al-Hayyah, we realize that he composed this chapter by copying and pasting text of the Urḍī's Kitab al-Hayyah with some modification, but without the name of his source. In fact, at the beginning of the Nihaya, Book 4, Chapter 9, Shirazi summarized Urḍī's presentation of the farthest and nearest distance of each planet. He reproduced Urḍī's criticism without mentioning the name of Urḍī, as is on the screen. This example makes clear that he wrote this chapter mainly by copying and pasting Urḍī's words. Moreover, the comparison between the Nihaya Book 4, Chapter 10 and Urḍī's Kitab al-Hayyah reminds us that he made Chapter 10 on the correct method of determining the distances and the bodies by, again, copying and pasting Urḍī's text, where he presented Urḍī's calculation of the distances and bodies of the planets as a correct method, again, without mentioning Urḍī's name. Thus, the overview of the Nihaya Book 4 shows how Shirazi edited the Nihaya and how he accepted Urḍī's new planetary order. While Shirazi composed the Nihaya mainly by reproducing the text of the Tazkira with explanatory materials when needed, he added Kushar's explanation as a popular alternative to Tusi's. But in concluding part, that is chapters 9 and 10, he criticized Kushar's calculation as well as Tusi's calculation by using Urḍī's text, and presented Urḍī's calculation as the correct one. Given the history of his study of astronomy with Tusi, Shirazi's experience of learning the Tazkira with Tusi might reflect his way of expanding the contents of the Tazkira with the Tahlil al-Majesty and Kushar's Gij, as well as his focus on Urḍī's Kitab al-Hayyah. Remarkably is that although the Malaga associates, including Tusi, struggled with Urḍī's thesis and defended the standard planetary order, Shirazi finally accepted Urḍī's order, opposing to his teacher Tusi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taro, for this very rich paper entitled Müeyyedüddin al-Urdî's Impact on Kutbuddin Şîrâzî concerning planetary order. And it's really interesting that he followed al-Urdî instead of his famous teacher, Tusi. It's really interesting. Yeah, thank you very much. So we can give the word to our second speaker. So Amir-Mohammad Gemini. He will be presenting his paper entitled A Survey of the Most Comprehensive Book in Persian, Kutbuddin Şîrâzî's İhtiyârât-ı Muzafferî. And Amir is from the University of Tehran, and he is also an historian of astronomy in Islamic period. He published extensively on Kutbuddin Şîrâzî. I would like to also mention his book entitled Animal Circles, a survey of the history of cosmology in Islam. So, Amir, the floor is yours. Amir, could you please unmute yourself? We couldn't hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much, dear Hasan. I am really happy to be here. I really appreciate to have this opportunity to give my lecture on Kutbuddin Şîrâzî. Do you see my PowerPoint? You see my
Yes.
You see my slides. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I will give you a survey of the most comprehensive higher book in Persian, Kutbuddin Şîrâzî's İhtiyârât-ı Muzafferî. Şîrâzî proposed 3 books in Hay'a that I give them the title, a trilogy in Hay'a. After this trilogy, he wrote his Fa'al Tafala Talam, but here I want only talk about this trilogy in Hay'a, especially about Ikhtiyârât Muzafferî. As Taro told us about Nihayat al-Idrak fi Dirayat al-Aflak, it is in Arabic and it is completed in 1281 in Anatolia in Arabic. After that, around 4 months later, only 4 months later after completing Nihaya, he completes Ikhtiyârât Muzafferî in Persian in the same year in March 1282. In Sivas. In this Ikhtiyârât Muzafferî, I could find some documents to prove that he completed Ikhtiyârât Muzafferî in Sivas. 4 years later, he completed his Al-Tuhfa al-Shahiyah in Arabic in 1285 in Anatolia. I could find this document at the last page of Tehran National Library of Ikhtiyârât Muzafferî. We can read that Faraga Musannif, Afzal al-Wara, Ustad al-Anam. Musannif means the author of the book. He completed this book قبل الصبح في ليلة العرفة سنة 86 680 ببلدة سیواس in city of Sivas. Here, this is the only document that we have about the place of completing Ikhtiyârât. This book is dedicated to Muzafferî'ddin Yulugh Arsalan, the ruler of Kastamonu. That is another city in Anatolia, and now this city is in Turkey. Niazi noticed that Shîrâzî dedicated his Persian works to rulers out of Mongol Empire. Dawrat-ı-Taj and Ikhtiyârât Muzafferî, both of them are dedicated to someone, a ruler out of Mongol Empire. Here I want to mention some things about the Shîrâzî's motivations for writing Ikhtiyârât. First, he explains in the introduction of İhtiyârât Muzaffari that in his Nihaya, that was his previous work, his novel preferred models were not noticeable from other people's models. And from his words, we can understand that the title İhtiyârât does not mean an astrological meaning, doesn't have an astrological meaning, İhtiyârât. Does not mean hemerology, but here İhtiyârât means preferred models, his own preferred models. İhtiyâr has many meanings. One of these meanings is preferring, selecting. And here, İhtiyârât means the preferred, his own preferred novel models. Some new models and ideas which were not mentioned in Nihaya come, in fact, İhtiyârât includes some new models and ideas that were not mentioned in Nihaya. And the last motivation is that this book is written for a group of Persian-speaking audience, which was interested to know more about science of Hay'a, but they were not very good in Arabic, and he wrote his İhtiyârât Muzaffari. We can have a comparison between Nihayat al-Idrak and İhtiyârât Muzaffari. In fact, many paragraphs are translated from Nihaya, but not all the content is simply translated. Both represented several criticisms of previous scholars, Tusi and Urḍî's models or Harakî's astronomical ideas, etc. In İhtiyârât, an independent chapter for difficulties of Ptolemaic models is mentioned, but we don't see such a chapter in Nihayat al-Idrak. In İhtiyârât, the Ptolemaic models are presented at first place in the chapters of each one of the superior and inferior planets. Sorry, this sentence I wrote here is not true. In Nihaya, the Ptolemaic models are presented at first place. But in İhtiyârât, it is the non-Ptolemaic, his own non-Ptolemaic model are presented at first place. In İhtiyârât, novel Shirazi's models are introduced in chapters of each one of the superior or inferior planets, while they are all introduced in Nihaya after the chapter of latitudes. So the audience of the book cannot understand which model is Shirazi's own new model and which one is Tusi's and which one is Urḍî's. We know that Kennedy, in one of his papers, introduced Urḍî's model as Shirazi's model. And after that, some years later, Salibak found out that this model is not Shirazi's and it belongs to Urḍî. It shows that why Şîrâzî completed İhtiyârât, because he wanted to bring his own model at the first place, that the audience, the reader, can understand which model is his own models. Okay, in İhtiyârât, a complete map of Europe is presented in the chapter of mathematical geometry. A complete map of Europe through a table of numbers and city names, that if you read these numbers and city names, the reader can draw a map for himself or herself. While Nihaya lacks this map of Europe. This is one of the most interesting issues of İhtiyârât. Now I want to introduce İhtiyârât Muzaffari as a Hay'a book. I think the Hay'a books included a physical, geometrical consideration of the universe, planetary models, mathematical geometry, distances and sizes of the planets and orbs, etc. We can categorize Hayya books in two groups: abridged Hayya books and comprehensive Hayya books. Abridged Hayya books include a summary of Ptolemaic models without argumentations or demonstrations. On the other side, comprehensive Hayya books, most of the content of these books is presented in companion of arguments, demonstrations, criticism of previous scholars' ideas. Of course, this categorization is not very sharp. We may see or find some books in this genre that they have a little of argumentations, but there are summary too. But I think this categorization can help us to understand these books better. İhtiyârât Muzaffari may be considered as the most comprehensive Hayya book in Persian. Abridged Hayya books before İhtiyârât, you have many books, many abridged Hayya books before İhtiyârât in Persian. For example, Tusi's Mu'iniyah or Mas'udi's Jahan Danish. Or we have some abridged Hayya books in Arabic, like Ibn Haysam's Fi Hay'at al-Alam or Tusi's Zubdat al-Hayya. But if we want to find the comprehensive Hayya books in Arabic before İhtiyârât, we can mention Kharaqi's Muntaha al-Idrak, Tusi's al-Tazkari fil Hay'a, Urḍī's Kitab al-Hay'a, etc. In fact, only one comprehensive Hayya book in Persian before İhtiyârât is Kharaqi's Umda Khwarezmshahi. But İhtiyârât is much more extended in details than Kharaqi's Umda Khwarezmshahi. It includes İhtiyârât includes so much argumentations and criticisms that we cannot find these criticisms in any other book in Persian. All the professional books in science of Hay'a were written in Arabic. So we can understand that İhtiyârât Muzaffari could be very useful for a group of Persian-speaking people who were trained in mathematics, who were trained in astronomy, that they were able to understand a professional Hayya book like İhtiyârât Muzaffari. Okay, after an introduction of this book, I want to give something about the edition of the İhtiyârât Muzaffari that in recent years I was engaged with. I applied 6 early extant manuscripts of İhtiyârât from Iranian, Russian, and Turkish library. It took 8 or 9 years of my life to work on this, to prepare this edition of İhtiyârât Muzaffari. To find the correct record in case of any difference between these manuscripts, I relied on the most frequent ones. Nevertheless, the logic of the geometric or scientific argumentations was my hint to find the correct records. I also could find out some signs of authors' later modifications to the original texts, which shows at least 2 versions of the text. Here of all the manuscripts of İhtiyârât in Iran, Russia, and Turkey, the preferred manuscripts that I applied in my edition are in 2 groups. The group 1 are all from the Tehran National Library, and the second group are from Turkey, from Sultan Fatih Library, St. Petersburg Library, and Nur Osmaniye Mosque Library. First, I made my edition by the group A, and in any case of a difference between this group, I checked the points in the group, in the manuscripts of group B. Okay. Now I want to give some considerations from the content of Ikhtiyârât Muzaffari. How much time do I have?
You have around 7 minutes.
7 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
Many thanks. Okay, I want to go inside Ikhtiyârât Muzaffari to mention some of his novel models in this book. First of all, I have to mention something about the difficulties of the Ptolemaic planetary models that some of the scholars like Tusi and Urḍī and Şîrâzî tried to solve these difficulties by presenting new non-Ptolemaic planetary models. The first difficulty, the main difficulty, is called the equant problem. In fact, the non-uniform motion of the difference in longitude due to the uniform circular motion of the epicycle center C relative to the equant point E rather than the different center D. In Ptolemaic model, the point C rotates uniformly around the point E, not to the point D that is the center of the difference. So the different have to rotate non-uniform to make this uniform motion. This was one of the, this was in contradiction with the physical permissions of the Hay'a books in Science of Hay'a that says all the orbs, all the celestial spheres have to rotate uniformly. They cannot rotate non-uniform. So this point, this equant point that make this non-uniform motion is the first difficulty of the Ptolemaic models. The second difficulty is the oscillation problem. To make the latitude motion of the planets, Ptolemy brings this motion to the epicycles. All the epicycles have a oscillation in their motion, and this is also in contradiction with the physical permissions. The first scholar who mentions these difficulties is Ibn al-Haytham in his Al-Shukuk ala Batlamiyus. After him, Urḍī, Tusi, and Şîrâzî present their own non-Ptolemaic models to solve these difficulties. Okay. Tusi, for example, we can see here the Tusi simple model that involves the Tusi couple to make the uniform motion of the epicycle center according to the point, the equant point. This is his model, and Şîrâzî presents two versions of Tusi's model in Ikhtiyârât Muzaffari, and he makes some considerations on Tusi's model. In Şîrâzî's opinion, there is an inevitable rest between the back and forth motions in Tusi's couple. Rest, according to Aristotelian natural philosophy, is not allowed for heavenly bodies. But Şîrâzî himself believes that there is no rest in Tusi couple, but this is mentioned in Tuhfa Şahiyye. And this is Tusi's lunar model, and Şîrâzî criticizes Tusi's planetary model for the moon. He believes that the number of the additional spheres is too many. And the path of the epicycle center in Tusi's models is not exactly a circle. And he believed that these are some difficulties in Tusi's planetary model. And he in his Nihaya, and after that in his Ihtiyârât, Şîrâzî wants to bring a new model without these difficulties. This is all these planetary models. Sorry for my fast presenting in this point. Şîrâzî present two versions of Urḍī model. In fact, I mean that Urḍī presented one model for the superior planet, but Şîrâzî inspires from Urḍī's model and makes two different versions of Urḍī's model. Here I cannot explain the exact motions of these circles, but Şîrâzî brings his criticism of Urḍī's model for the superior planets. He believes that it is not allowed to displace the different center from its original position in Ptolemite model. Since Ptolemy did not present any proof for the position of a different center, nevertheless, this criticism, I think, is not plausible. Okay, here is the last point I give you. Here we see Urḍī's model for Mercury. In Urḍī's model for Mercury, we see no addition in the model. We see no secondary epicycle. Only the speed of the motions is made different, are different from the Ptolemite models. But Şîrâzî gives his criticism of Urḍī's model for Mercury. He writes, if this sort of argumentation, he means Urḍī's argumentation for his non-Ptolemaic model, if this sort of argumentation is allowed, it would be possible to say that the uniform motion of the epicycle center and the alignment may be with respect to another point near to the point which is proven by argument. And if it be so, certainly would leave the geometrical arguments, and this science, I mean astronomy, would enter among other conjectural sciences. Heaven forbid. I wrote the point, the Şîrâzî's criticism, the details of this criticism in my paper. I think here I cannot go into the details, but only give you some hints about these points. I think my time is completed, and many thanks for hearing me, for listening me.
Well, thank you very much, Emir, for this insightful presentation. So there are great news. So you are now preparing a critical edition of this text, which would be very important contribution to the literature. So we are looking for it. And also another point you have made that so this İhtiyârât-ı Muzafferi, it was written in Sivas, right? I had an impression that it was written in Kastamonu. Maybe it was. So my knowledge was not extensive about that. But now we learned, at least I learned that it was written also in Sivas, which means that his trilogy, all of them were written in Sivas, right? And thank you for thank you for sharing this in this symposium. So I think it's very meaningful. So thank you, Emir, again, and let's give the word to our third speaker, Hanif Qalenderi. He is also from the University of Tehran, and he is an historian of astronomy in Islamic period. I would like to I would like to mention his recent book, the publication of Harakî's Muntaha. Harakî is a very important figure in the history of theoretical astronomy. He's a foundational figure, actually. So it's a very important contribution, Hanif, congratulations on its publication. And actually, his paper will establish a link between Harakî and Şîrâzî, and the paper is entitled as Kutbuddin Şîrâzî's references in his Hayyê writings to al-Djabbār al-Kharaqî's works, the 6th century after Hijrah, Hayyê author. So the floor is yours, Hanif.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, I try to share my I wish you've seen my screen.
I think within a moment. Yes, now we see it. Kind of. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, and thank you Hasan for introducing me, and I wish everyone well. I'm using PowerPoint, Microsoft Office 7 for some problem with my laptop, and I don't know what is. I hope that my slides you can see my slides well.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
I thank the organizer of the conference, and I want to talk somewhat different from previous speakers, maybe. I want to talk about one of the most important work in Hayyê tradition, which had a significant impact on subsequent works, like al-Shirazi's works. I divide my presentation into 3 parts. First, life of al-Djabbār al-Kharaqī, and then short history of Hayyê works and his Muntaha, and then I mentioned the references of the other Hayyê work, others to the Muntaha. The order of Muntaha al-Idrak fi taqasim al-aflaq, the utmost attainment on the divisions of the orbs. Bahauddin Abu Muhammad al-Djabbār ibn Muhammad ibn Sabit ibn Ahmad al-Sabiti al-Kharaqī, his full name, has been confused in the secondary sources with another scholar also named Kharaq. The 2 were from Kharaq, a small town near Marv, now Mari in Turkmenistan. The other Kharaqī, Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Hussein ibn Abi Bishr al-Kharaqī. The first Kharaqī died in 566, and the second one died in 500. The first one died in 553. And the second one died in 533 after Hijrah. Many secondary sources have perpetuated this confusion. Abdul Karim al-Sam'ani, a contemporary of the 2 Kharaqīs, whom he most likely knew personally, dedicated a separate entry to each of them in his At-Tahbir fil Mu'jam al-Kabir. And Sam'ani says that Abu Bakr al-Kharaqī went to Nishabur, but Abdul Jabbar al-Kharaqī lived in Marv, and he didn't travel to any other city until Khwarazm-Shah's invasion to Marv. That we know it from another source, Zahiruddin al-Bayhaqi, the author of Tatammeh Sevan al-Hikmah. Bayhaqi mentions that Kharaqī was one of the scholars of Marv and wrote a number of works on the subjects of Hay'a, Ma'qulat, maybe philosophy, and Tarikh, history. According to Bayhaqi, Khwarazm-Shah brought Kharaqī with him to Khwarazm. The Khwarazm-Shah of Bayhaqi report should be Alauddin Atsez, who wrote between 521 to 551 after Hijrah, who occupied Marv and Nishabur in 536 after Sultan Sanjar's defeat by Qaraqatay Turks and his escape to Balkh. According to Ibn al-Asir, Atsez took some scholars from the occupied cities, including Kharaqī, with him to Khwarazm. Furthermore, Kharaqī, in the introduction to Umdah Khwarazm-Shahi, his Persian Hay'a work that is dedicated to Atsez, alludes to his residence in Khwarazm. In this work, Kharaqī mentioned the degree of the apogee of the sun for the year 536. Which can be interpreted as the book's date of composition and which indicates Kharaqī's scientific activity right after his relocation to Khwarazm. Excuse me. An undated Persian letter to Kharaqī by Rashiduddin Watfat, the secretary at the court of Atsez, can shed further light on the Kharaqī's life in Khwarazm. At the beginning of the letter, Watfat apologizes for the delay in sending the letter due to some military affairs. Other letters of Watfat belonging approximately to the same period refer to gathering of armies in Khorasan in order to suppress the Qaws rebellion after the flight of Sultan Sanjar. The Qaws rebellion began in the year 548 and Sanjar was imprisoned by them until 550, at which point he escaped to Marv. Consequently, it's possible that this letter was written around 550 or later. Therefore, we can conclude that Kharaqī was in Khwarazm from 536 until the death of Atsez in 551, after which he returned to Marv because he died in Marv in 553. This is the short history about the life of Kharaqī that confused with another Kharaqī, and we have in some secondary sources in researchers that Kharaqī they confuse Kharaqī with these two Kharaqī with each other. The word Hay'a, as Dr. Gamini said, refers to a group of writings which present a non-technical account of Ptolemaic astronomy, often devoid of any arithmetical calculation or geometrical demonstration. In terms of a series of circles or a sphere, each turning round in center with a uniform circular motion. This definition is too general and simplified to do justice to the genre and the many modifications it went through. It can serve as a starting point. The standard examples of what we call Hay'a works appear from late 5th century. The first work may be the Geyhan Shanacht in Persian, which wrote by قطان مرزی. Some works before the book في حياة العالم, Ibn al-Haytham's في حياة العالم, with accepted Professor Rashid's treatise to that في حياة العالم wrote by Muhammad ibn al-Haytham, not Hasan ibn al-Haytham. It's some works before Ibn al-Haytham's work, that the early works of early Haya works, people that we don't want to talk about them here. But after that, we have the standard form of Haya works from the late 5th century, and the first one is Kharaqi's work. The Qattan, this name, Gehan Shanacht, is not a standard form of Haya work. Is not in a standard form of Haya work, but we can put it in this tradition so, but not, this is not the accurate, this is not a precise work. Kharaqī, in his introduction to Muntaha, tells us, that he has based this work on that of Ibn al-Haytham and that Abu Ja'far al-Khazan. And Ibn al-Haytham were among those scholars who considered the planetary movements to be created by the motion of solid orbs. Therefore, even so, we are not in the position to assert Ibn al-Haytham's work as the first standard book on Haya. We can take Fi Hayat al-Alam as a turning point from early to a standard work. We now see Haya works from Kharaqī, منتهى الإدراك في تقاسيم الأفلاك, التبصرة في علم الهيئة, and one work in Persian, عمده خوارزمشاهی در بیان ابداعات الهی. The Khwarazm Shah pillar on the creations of God. That work considered as a Persian translation of Muntaha, but new researchers on that is shown it is a separate work, and I wish that can make a critical edition of this work. Even though Kharaqi's fame in mathematical sciences is clear from the sources, none of his astronomical works have been listed in early bibliographical sources. Among the latter bibliographers, Haji Khalifa mistakenly attributed Muntaha and Tabsara to Abu Bakr al-Kharaqī. In fact, 4 of the 5 extant manuscripts of Muntaha mention al-Djabbār al-Kharaqī as the author. Muntaha is a comprehensive Haya work, and the Tabsara, as the author said, is a brief work based on the former. The Umda apparently did not circulate as widely as Muntaha and the Tabsara, and thus has not been acknowledged in the modern sources. It's most likely that the 2 Arabic works were written within a short period of time, since in both works, the degree of the apogee of the sun, the location of the North Pole, and the degree of the apogee of the planets are listed for the beginning of the year 1444 of the Byzantine era, 526 after Hijra. Another fact that suggests a composition date close to 526 for Muntaha is that Kharaqī, in discussing the old theory of cycles of the conjunctions between Jupiter and Saturn, says that he's writing in the period of the conjunction of the year 521, 5 years before the this time of the composition of the book. Kharaqī dedicated the Tabsara to a certain Amir Shamsuddin Ala-ad-Dawla Fakhr al-Muluk Abul Hussein Ali ibn Nasruddin Muhammad ibn Muzaffar. This person may be the son of Nasiruddin Muzaffar, known as the Ibn Abi Tawbah, who was Sultan Sanjar's vizier between 521 and 526. This is the historical note about the writing time. Now I list references to Muntaha in some another higher books. We can see the reference to Kharaqī in the higher works after the Muntaha, but we couldn't see his name in all of them. Sharafuddin Mas'udi, in his Al-Kifaya fi al-Malaya, his Arabic form, mentioned the name of Kharaqī, mentioned Kharaqī's name, but he in his Persian work Jahan Danish didn't mention Kharaqī's name. The impact of Kharaqī is clear on 7th century after Hijra. Nasiruddin Tusi, in his Ar-Risala al-Mu'ayyad and its supplement Hal Shukuk, refers to Kharaqī with the expression Sahib Muntaha al-Idrak, the author of Muntaha al-Idrak. Mu'ayyadüddin al-Urḍī cited Kharaqī in his higher work as al-Kharaqī or Sahib al-Tabsara. He criticized Kharaqī about his some definitions of magnitudes in higher. Kutbuddin Şîrâzî refers to Kharaqī in several places of this work, which could be grouped two types: citation and criticism. But we have only one citation, but other is criticism of Kharaqī. He criticizes Kharaqī like Urḍī in some definitions, like the arc of equation of anomaly, or the magnitude of the equation of anomaly's angle, something like this. I list some of them in this table. I use manuscript number 2609 of Ihtiyârât in Iran National Library, manuscript 956 of Kuprulu Library for Nihaya, and manuscript 6130 of Majlis Library Tehran for Tuhfa. You can see that the definition of the arc corresponds to the equation of anomaly of the sun, variation of moonlight, sectors, netaghat in higher, and on the distance and masses. And something like that in Nihaya and Tuhfa. The last sentence, that only reference to Kharaqī's Umda is in his Nihayat al-Idrak, on one occasion that he refers to Kharaqī by the expression صاحب العمدة الخوارزمشاهی. This is the only reference to Umda. I should mention that he in Nihaya and in Tuhfa he says بعض المتأخرين in very in his expressions, and we could understand that he wants to mention to Kharaqī. Thank you very much. I hope that my English
Thank you very much, Hanif. Thank you very much, Hanif, for the informative points you have made. So, yeah, as I said before, and as you have pointed out as well, Harakî is a very important figure, and it is actually not surprising that Şîrâzî and other astronomers they refer to him frequently. So thank you very much to our presenters. So we have sort of like 3 minutes to close this session. So I think we can receive 1 or 2 quick questions. Do we have any questions from our audience?
Can I ask to Amir about the map of Europe? Is there any request from the patron to have European map? So Şîrâzî determined to include Europe map in İhtiyâr. Do you have any thought about the reason of his inclusion of the map?
I think Dr. Fatemeh Savadi made some research and study on this part, and she will publish his research very soon. But as I can tell you about the motivation of Şîrâzî to bring such an interesting map of Europe in his book, I think this is because of the ruler that he dedicated his book to. That ruler, I think. He was the Muzafferî'ddin Arsalan, and he was the ruler of Kastamonu, and he had maybe some affairs and some relations with the European kings or European rulers, and he needed an exact map of the Europe. Maybe this is only a guess, I think. And I don't know anything about his references, his sources. I don't know, because I didn't study this point, and I think Dr. Fatemeh Savadi will give many interesting things about these points in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. That's a really important point, and yeah, we look forward to learning more about that. So let's close this session here. Thank you very much, Taro, Amir, and Hanif, for your valuable presentations and contribution to the symposium. So, and also many thanks to our audience for your interest in this panel. And just before closing our session, let me say that after 15 minutes, there will be another panel on Şîrâzî's mathematical sciences, his mathematics, optics, and music. So please stay tuned with us. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thanks so much. Hope to see you very soon. Bye.
Hope to see you in person. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.